Hi, are you there, Brian? Okay, I don't know if the participants are able to hear us or not.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out this webinar thing. So everyone bear with
Whoa.
us. It's a little different than what I'm used to, so I'm not sure if the attendees can hear us or not.
Doug Barra
Let's
says
see if
he
there's a
can
way
hear
for
us.
me to ask them if we can hear you. Okay, they can hear us. Good. Thank you, Doug, for letting us know. I am just going to try to share the slides and we'll get the presentation underway. People are still trickling in, so we'll give them a few more minutes to join us. Yay, thank you for telling us that you can hear us. I'm not sure how to undisable the chat. Let me see if I can figure that out. No, I don't know how to do that. So if you guys have anything that you want to say in the chat, you're gonna have to put it in the question and answer. Sorry about that. There is a way to enable the chat, but I'm just not sure how to do it. Let's see, attendees. Okay, wait, I think I figured it out. Hold on. Okay, somebody try to write something in the chat and see if it works. Yay, I figured it out. Okay. See, you would think after all these years of using Zoom that we would know how to do it. But this is like the webinar module, so it's a tiny bit different than I'm used to. So for that is why I wasn't sure how to do it. Yay. Okay, good. So we can chat, we can ask question and answer. We have 43 people, so that's about half of the registered participants. So let's wait just a couple more minutes and then we'll get underway. I'm gonna bring the slides up. Do that while we're waiting. So we're not gonna have that many slides, but we do have a few slides. The rest of it, we'll just be having a conversation. No, that's thing is with this, I can't see the Zoom. All I see are my slides and I don't see you guys in the Zoom anymore. So let's see if I can figure out a different way. Okay, guys, I'm failing at this. I probably should have tested it out beforehand, but I share it first. So you can see that, yes, but it's not in like the view that I want you guys to see it. So let's try it one last time. Okay. No. So Brian,
Yes.
he, give me a little bit of insight into what you see when I do that. Do you see just
I
the slide
see
or do
a
you see like the
slide.
presenter stuff?
No, I just see the slide. I
Okay,
don't
yay,
see
I did
the,
it.
menu. Yeah,
Okay,
there
I
you go.
think we have success, ladies and gentlemen. We've got 49 people, so I think we'll just get started, and anyone else that decides to trickle in, they can just join us in progress since we're already a little bit behind schedule. So thank you everyone so much for coming. I really appreciate you being here today. We're going to have a little discussion about immigration in the post-election world, prospects for 2025 and beyond. I'm Deirdre Nero. Most of you, or many of you, know me. But if you don't, here's a little bit about me. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you can grab your phones right now and scan that QR code to connect with me on LinkedIn, where I will be, as all of the things we're going to chat about today develop over time. I'll be posting lots of updates on social media. So if we're not already connected on LinkedIn, please go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. On the last slide, you'll also have my full contact information, and we also have, for the law firm, Facebook, X, YouTube, and what am I missing? Instagram. So you can follow the firm on all of those social media channels, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter if you want to get on our email list. So any of those ways, you'll be able to stay updated with kind of all of these things that we're going to discuss today as they develop over time once the new administration comes in. But as for me, I've been practicing immigration for 21 years. I have with me Brian Redinger, who, Brian, I don't know if you want to turn your camera on and say hi to the people. But if not, he's here with me. He's one of my team members. He's going to monitor the questions and the chat for us. And if he wants to chime in, he certainly can. Brian's been on my team as one of my paralegals for several years now. And he lived through part of the first Trump administration on my team. So he always has an interesting take on things. Here you see the rest of our team. You see Brian there. There's me, the founding attorney of the firm. And then those of you that are clients of our firm, you might recognize some of these folks. This is Jessica, our senior paralegal. Brian and Mariela are our paralegals. Carolina and Christina are our law clerks, and Linda is our administrative coordinator. And together, we're here to help you guys through the current immigration laws and any changing landscape that we're going to be facing over the next couple of years. So what can we expect for immigration law under the new Trump administration? Well, first of all, let me start with my disclaimer. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell the future. I am going to try to give you kind of like my best estimations on what we think could potentially happen once the new administration comes into power and starts to put their policies and vision into place. But of course, it's the future. So we don't actually know what exactly is going to happen. So that's kind of why I want you guys to make sure that you are staying connected with me in some way, either through the email newsletter or through social media, or just reaching out to me over email, whatever you're comfortable with, but staying in touch with someone who is kind of living this stuff as their career and really kind of dissecting everything that's going on and the minutia of all of it. We don't expect that any of you that aren't in the immigration field do that, because you all have your lives to live and your own things that you're worried about in your day-to-day lives. And so this is the stuff that me and my team that you just saw on the previous slide eat, sleep, and breathe every single day. And so I would love for you to reach out to us if you ever have questions or concerns. Take what you read online with a grain of salt. A lot of it is accurate, a lot of it isn't accurate. If you're ever wondering kind of what to believe, it's a good idea to come to, educated sources that are trying to look at this from your perspective. And the things you read online are not always doing that. That being said, another thing I wanted to mention before we jump into like more of the detail is that I don't intend for today to be a political conversation. I'm not taking a political side or view on any of this. We're going to try to stay as neutral as possible in our analysis, which is what we do all the time, right? Like we all have our own political leanings, but our clients are from all different parties and all different ideologies and countries around the world, and believe different things, and we give our same zealous representation to everyone that we work with, regardless of their political leanings. And so we're going to attempt to stay as neutral as possible with our discussion today. So please keep that in mind in the chat. Please refrain from any overtly political commentary in your messages in the chat. If we could all just stay as neutral and civil as possible in our chats and questions, I think everyone would appreciate that. We are basing what we're going to talk about today on a couple of things. So we're basing it, like I said, we can't tell the future. So we're basing it on what then? We're basing it on what happens during the first Trump administration, right? So that's kind of like historical data that we can look to give us an idea of what might happen, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that everything that happened in the first Trump administration is going to happen again or be like resurrected in the second administration, but it gives us a good idea of what potentially could happen in terms of policy. We're also basing it on, the news and stories that have come out in reputable news sources over the past couple of weeks on things that Trump or his surrogates himself said, during the campaign. A little bit less on that, but that does factor into it to a degree. And then additionally, I've been talking to a lot of colleagues who are well-respected immigration practitioners with many years of expertise in different areas of immigration law. And I've been talking to a lot of them online and in different groups that I'm in. So this is also based on some of what my colleagues have said and discussed with me in different venues. So just putting that out there, that's where the information we're going to discuss today comes from. But again, it's all kind of just educated speculation, for lack of a better thing to call it, right? Because obviously we can't see the future and we don't know yet exactly what's going to happen. Okay, so we're going to jump into a bit of the minutia here. I'm going to try not to get like too technical, just because we have kind of a mixed audience today. I was looking at the registration list. We've got attorneys from different areas of law. We've got some immigration practitioners. We've got clients. We've got just business people and other interested individuals. So we kind of have a mixed audience. So, I'm gonna do my best to navigate the mixed nature of the audience in terms of the level of detail we're going to talk about here. But of course, anything that you want to know more about specifically, we'll have some time for question and answer. But also in addition to that, you're always free to reach out to me individually and ask me questions. Okay, the purpose of today though was to just try and give you guys a broad overview of what we think is gonna happen on several different areas of immigration law. We are gonna focus more on business and family immigration. We'll touch a little bit on some of the humanitarian stuff, but we're not going to talk too much about like the deportation issue that they were talking about a lot on the news. We will talk about it a little bit though. I think on 2 slides from now, I think, or something like that. Okay, so let's dive right in. One thing that we remember very vividly from the first administration of Trump was that there were travel bans instituted. Some of these bans came about during the COVID-19 pandemic that restricted access for people to traveling and to getting immigrant and non-immigrant visas. We do think that some of this could come back, except not necessarily in like the context of a pandemic anymore, because thank God we're not in that situation right now, thank goodness. None of us want to go back to those days. That was awful, and we're very lucky to have that behind us, but potentially we could see a return of travel restrictions, be they banned, like full bans, or some kind of restriction on travel. The Muslim countries ban, that was one that didn't necessarily have to do with the pandemic, so that is something that could that we could see come back. We could possibly add China and other countries that as they kind of fall out of favor with the administration, having some kind of travel restrictions into the US. So that's definitely something that we're going to keep on the radar. In terms of like the consulates and travel with like visas from your consulates, we're looking at the Buy American, Hire American initiative that was part of the first Trump administration, possibly coming back. That can add like extra requirements for people when they're applying for visas at the US embassies and consulates abroad to have to prove that they're, not taking away jobs from Americans, and on the flip coin of that, depending on what type of visa it is, that they're going to be creating jobs for US workers. That's not completely something brand new, right? Like a lot of times that's something that they look at now when you're applying for a visa. So it's not completely different. It's just the way that they kind of interpret that becomes like a little bit stricter, and they look at it through a narrower lens. So that's something that we can see kind of come back as well. We also think that expanded administrative processing and extreme vetting that was happening during the first Trump administration at the embassy and consular level, when applicants are actually applying for visas abroad, can come back. There's a thing called the DS 5535, which is a form that requires very detailed explanations about the history of the applicant. That we don't see it a lot, but we think that that could become more widely used. There was a very small kind of in-country visa revalidation pilot going on in the past, I want to say it was like year or so. We think that that's probably going to get suspended. It wasn't being widely used at any rate, so I don't know how far-reaching a suspension of that program you know, how many people that would actually affect, but I mean, it's definitely something that was seen as a liberalization of policies. So we expect that that will probably be reined back in, and that was where people were able to actually revalidate their visas inside of the U.S. without having to travel to the embassies and consulates abroad. It was super limited in usage. Certain countries only, certain types of visas only. So again, not a far-reaching benefit to a lot of classes of applicants, but something nonetheless that was great if you were one of the people that it applied to. But we think that that's likely to go away. We do think that trained consular officers that have been working under this current administration, you know, sometimes when there's a change in the administration, there's a flight of some of the experienced officers. They leave their posts, they're replaced, or both. They leave or and some are that don't leave are replaced. So that can then lead to backlogs and slowdowns at the consulates because there are less officers to adjudicate cases, and the ones that are put in maybe are less experienced. So that also leads to more uneven, for lack of a better way of putting it, adjudications, which, to be honest with you, it's not great already. We do see a lot of kind of uneven adjudications across consulates and across different types of visa applications. So we just expect that to get potentially worse than it already is, which honestly, it's not great the way it is, to be honest with you. And like I said, a lot of this stuff is not political, right? Like a lot of problems that the government has in terms of like the way immigration processes work is agnostic to the politics aspect of it. Like there's bad things under all administrations, and from the perspective of like the lawyer and a lot of times the applicants, like we see inefficiencies and backlogs and very uneven adjudications and, you know, strange things happening regardless of the administration. But, you know, we expect that things might get like a little bit amplified with the new administration. We do think that there's going to be some higher risk of denials for certain types of visas, especially potentially L visas, E visas. We've already, at least, you know, I know a lot of people and ourselves as well have noticed some strange adjudications coming out on L's at the consular level after USCIS has properly approved the petition. So, you know, that happens. All right, hold on. That happens already. But again, like we expect that might get amplified a little bit. One other thing that we are considering here, talking about like consulate adjudications, is just holding stricter standards for proving things like immigrant intent. When someone goes to apply for a non-immigrant visa, that is not supposed to be intending to immigrate to the US. A lot of visas get denied because they say that you didn't prove that you aren't intending to immigrate to the US, right? And that's a reason, like, for example, a lot of tourist visas get denied for that. A lot of student visas get denied for that because they say, you know, the person doesn't have sufficient ties to their home country to prove that they're not going to stay in the US, even though they're saying that they're coming just for a short-term visit. That's already pretty, you know, a lot of cases are denied based on that. So we expect that standard is just going to become even tighter and a little bit harder to pass through. So that's something that we envision happening. Something I think probably a lot of you are curious about is the TPS, asylum and beneficiaries of the CHNB parole, which is Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, Venezuelan parole program that was put into place under this current administration, with the Biden administration. We do expect a lot of these things to be rolled back, if not done away with completely. TPS, for those of you that don't know, I know a lot of you do know, but it's temporary protected status. Temporary protected status is basically based on executive actions that the administration takes to designate certain countries as countries that are in some way suffering from some kind of strife. It's typically like some kind of like a war, or a really bad natural disaster, or a really severe political, situation that has, some kind of violent or, dangerous aspect to it. So over the years, we've seen Venezuela, Haiti. Those are the two that I think got a lot of exposure under the Biden administration. Venezuela was a newer designation the last couple of years. A lot of our clients here in South Florida took advantage of the TPS for Venezuela and for Haiti. We don't know if those programs are going to go away, right? But we do know that President-elect Trump has expressed desire to roll back a lot of the TPS designations. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to go away, but we do think that it's tenuous, right? He's expressed that he wants to roll back those programs, and those are programs that are easily rolled back, right? Not everything can just be kind of done away with at the whim of whoever the serving president is. But there are certain types of benefits that come from mainly an executive or administrative action of the executive. And so TPS is one of those things. And so it's an easier benefit to get rid of, because it's also easier to put it in place in the first place, right? It doesn't have to go through the whole like congressional lawmaking process. And so that's why we believe that those programs are probably in one of the most tenuous situations. We can also unfortunately add probably DACA, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or you might know it better by the Dreamers moniker. That's an Obama era program that faced a lot of challenges during the first Trump administration, was rolled back a bit. We're expecting that potentially it could be rolled back even more, if not completely done away with. I'm not sure. I mean, I saw some news interviews with the vice president-elect where he seemed to indicate that that was a possibility. However, I do think that that would be wildly unpopular. So I'm not sure if they would end up going there in terms of the DACA, which is, mostly people who were brought to this country as little children with their parent, and a lot of times they didn't even realize that they didn't have proper immigration status until much later in their lives. They grew up their whole lives in the US, living, sometimes thinking that they were citizens, and then not even realizing until they were older and needed to go to apply for some kind of benefit that they didn't have the proper paperwork, and then their parents, would tell them the truth. And a lot of times they didn't even know. I mean, obviously that's not the situation for every single person that has DACA, but that's a common story. So potentially, in my opinion, again, take it for what it's worth with a grain of salt. It's really just my opinion, but I think that could be extremely unpopular to completely do away with, but I do expect to see some rolling back of the DACA program, and I wouldn't be surprised if TPS and the other humanitarian parole programs like the CHMB, which was a parole program put in place during the Biden administration for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans to be able to have a way to come to the US under a humanitarian arrival. So that's people who don't otherwise have like a visa to be able to arrive. And then once they would come, they'd be like paroled into the country for let's say 2 years, and then we're able to apply for a work permit, right? So it's a legal pathway to come, but these are some of the programs that we've seen the incoming administration they don't seem to agree that those are legal pathways, and that the people who are beneficiaries of some of these programs like TPS and the humanitarian programs and DACA are actually in the US legally. I mean, I beg to differ. I think every immigration attorney that you would speak to would disagree that beneficiaries of those programs are not in the US legally, but that's some of the rhetoric that we've heard out of the incoming administration. So it remains to be seen what they're going to do with those programs. But I do think that, unfortunately, those are vulnerable programs. Unfortunately, because those are vulnerable communities, right? And in my opinion, as an advocate, vulnerable communities are some of the communities that we need to try and protect the most, right? But unfortunately, they're vulnerable programs because of the fact that they are more administrative actions that are just taken by the executive that can easily be reversed. So that being said, if you are listening to this and you're falling into one of those categories, I suggest we have a one-on-one chat to see how we can better position you in something that might be a little bit more stable and less likely to go away at the whim of the new administration. So we will get to a slide soon that might give you like some basic recommendations, but that would definitely be one of them. I suggest that you guys see if you have other options for a positioning that is a little bit more permanent, because that could probably be a good idea to look into at this juncture, even though we don't exactly know what's going to happen yet. Okay, so moving on. H-1B. So H-1B is a professional work visa for US companies to sponsor people that have university level education in specialty occupations, or the equivalent mix of either just experience or experience and education that's equivalent to a bachelor's level degree in a specialty occupation. This program, I'm not sure why, but it's always been kind of like one of the most controversial non-immigrant work visa programs that has had like the most restrictions and has been heavily scrutinized by administrations going way back. I mean, you know, not just the past few administrations, but you know, this has been something for pretty much as long as I've been an attorney, 21 years that I can remember. There always being controversy of some kind with H-1Bs. The biggest thing is that there's a quota. There's only a certain amount of visas. Right now, the cap is super low. It's 65,000 visas per fiscal year, plus an additional 20,000 for master's degree level applicants that got their master's or higher degree from a US university. So they kind of get like a little bit of an extra lottery. This would have to be changed through congressional action. We are going to have probably both house. I don't know. Did they call the House yet? I think it was well on its way to being called for the Republicans taking control of both the House and the Senate. The Senate, we already know, is going to be a Republican majority. So, not to get political, but what that does mean is that when both houses of Congress and the executive are all from the same party, it does make it a little bit easier to get changes in the law pushed through. But still, that is a process. That's not something as easily done as, for example, an executive-based program like what we just talked about with TPS and the parole programs and DACA. So it would be more complicated to make large changes. There are, of course, ways to. So what we face, immigration attorneys will know this all too well. And the first Trump administration, we all used to kind of laugh through our tears every Friday when a new policy interpretation would drop from the Trump administration pretty much every Friday, making sure that all the immigration attorneys had a terrible weekend trying to figure out what this new policy meant for our practices and for our clientele. So, that's kind of how the other way, if you're not going to change the law completely, like the other way to make fast changes is to basically change the way that it's interpreted, right? And change kind of like the underlying policies of how the agencies that are in control of adjudicating these cases are supposed to interpret the law. And so making changes in that way, which is a lot easier and faster than actually changing the letter of the law. So what we expect to see for H-1Bs, we have heard, I don't want to freak anyone out. I'm not trying to scare you guys too. Like that's the other thing. Like I'm not playing the fear game here where we're trying to scare everyone. But I do want to give you the what ifs, right? And one thing that we have heard is that they could potentially lower the H-1B cap, which is basically like the opposite of what all of the immigration advocates have been arguing for years now, because the amount of visas that they allocate per fiscal year is nowhere near enough, right? Like it's very low for the demand. These are very high skilled workers that work in tech and work in engineering jobs and high level business jobs. They're degreed professionals, a lot of them that studied at US universities and got US based education that want to then continue their careers in the US workforce. A lot of STEM graduates, science, technology, engineering, and math graduates. But unfortunately, the amount of visas that we have now has been woefully low. We usually have around the last couple of years, I think it's hovering around 700,000 people vying for the 85,000 visas that are available. So it's already completely out of whack with the reality of the demand that's out there for bringing workers in under an H-1B. So lowering that could be very disastrous to the H-1B program and to both US companies that are reliant on foreign talent, but also for obviously the applicants that are competing for one of the slots that are the few precious slots that are available in this kind of lottery system that they've set up to pick who even gets to apply for that visa. So lowering that could really cause an interesting shakeup in that program, because it's already woefully inadequate in most professionals' opinions. The Buy American, Hire American executive action that we saw in the first administration could definitely play into the restrictions on the H-1B program. We do expect that, like in the first administration, when we saw a really high level of denials, under H-1Bs, and a lot more requests for additional evidence and higher processing times. We do expect those types of problems to come back full force during the next administration, especially, given the penchant for highly regulating this program. We recommend that employers who use this program a lot stay tuned closely to this matter, because we do think that it's probably one of the areas of employment-based immigration that is going to get picked on a lot. And it seems like this program is like the one that always gets picked on the most of any of the other work-related non-immigrant visas. So we don't expect for that to change. It's probably just going to get worse. And we suspect there's going to be things like altering the definition of what is a specialty occupation, maybe changing a law called AC-21, which allows for the H-1B to be extended past its limit of 6 years in certain circumstances. That was a rule that came into place during a Democratic administration. So we do think that that could potentially get rolled back. There's a lot of things that can happen here. Prevailing wages are part of the H-1B program. So raising those prevailing wages is something that can happen, which could essentially eliminate more entry-level professional jobs from qualifying for H-1Bs. So that's another thing that we can see there under the H-1Bs. So stay tuned. That one's gonna keep us on our toes for sure. I heard another one there. There was a modernization rule for the H-1B program that the Biden administration was working on, and it never was finalized all the way through. And so I was reading an article where they were saying potentially the new administration can jump in and kind of change some of it in like the final stretch, and then not really have to go through the whole regular process of notice and comment and like putting those rules out the way that they're supposed to be done. I don't know. I mean, that's just something that's another thing that I read. So that might be something interesting for us to watch as well on the H-1B front. In terms of L1s, these are intercompany transfer visas. We expect higher standards of review at U.S. consulates, increased RFEs with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. That's a request for additional evidence. And potentially even new rules being rolled out that might make it harder to qualify for an L1. Diversity and family immigration. So right now, there is something called the diversity visa lottery, where basically once per year, they have a small window where people can apply for basically to like win a green card in a lottery, for lack of a better way to describe it. It's not exactly what it is, but that's kind of an easy way to think about it. So we think that potentially the new administration is going to try to eliminate that program, or at least freeze it so that no new visas are issued under that program. That would be people that otherwise don't have a lot of good options for getting a green card, would be kind of foreclosed of their chance. That is a lottery though, so those are interesting, because it's like you have to enter that lottery to even have a chance at it, but at the end of the day, it's a lottery. So it's not really a strategy, right? Like I often tell people when I'm doing consultations and it comes up, I say, well, yeah, I mean, listen, buy a lottery ticket. Like, you're not going to win the $350 million Powerball if you don't buy a ticket. Like, it's impossible. You can't win it if you don't buy a ticket. However, like, buying a Powerball ticket is not like a strategy for paying your rent and your phone bill, right? Like, that's not going to be a viable strategy because you're probably not going to win. There's a very small chance, right? So it's kind of the same with the diversity visa lottery, but still, that is a valuable program that allows people from countries that have historically low levels of immigration into the US to get a green card in a way that is different than other options, that doesn't rely on them having, for example, a job offer in the US or a US citizen family member, or one of the more traditional ways of getting a green card. So that could be a ripe program to be eliminated. We also think that there might be some restrictions on family-based immigration. Trump has expressed in the past wanting to move more towards like a merit-based system that favors immigrants that have specific skills and they make specific economic contributions. Not that that is a bad thing to focus on, right? Like we all like skilled people and people that are going to make economic contributions to our country. That's great, but not necessarily at the expense of family-based immigration, which is when a US citizen or permanent resident can petition to sponsor their family member, typically a spouse, parent, adult or minor child, or sibling. Those are like the main categories of types of relatives that can be sponsored for US residents. So we suspect that potentially there could be restrictions of family-based immigration. That could mean a number of things, right? That could mean less visas available. So they don't actually change the system, but they just shrink the number of available visas or put some kind of like temporary freeze on issuance of those immigrant visas. Or that could potentially mean eliminating categories. I have heard in the past, not maybe necessarily in conjunction with anything that the incoming administration has expressed, but like I've definitely heard talk of in the past potentially like removing the sibling category. The sibling category is basically what we call the lowest preference, which means that it gets the least amount of available visas to be issued out of the full amount that's given in any given year. And so when you're applying through a sibling, so when a US citizen has a foreign national sibling that they want to sponsor, those cases traditionally take like 10, 15 or more years because there's so many people applying in that category, but so few visas given to that category because it's kind of like the lowest on the totem pole. And the way that these work is that there's a amount of visas per year, and then the categories have a preference level, and how high they are in kind of like the totem pole is like usually corresponding to the amount of visas that are allocated. And unfortunately, the sibling category is the lowest. So potentially doing away with that category, although, I don't quote me on that one because that's not something that I have heard about recently in conjunction with this administration, but I have heard that in the past. So, that could be an area that they might restrict, but we'll see how it plays out. A lot of times I don't agree with this terminology at all, but I've heard the incoming administration use this terminology where they call it like chain migration, where basically like, the family comes over and then like sponsors more family. And it's just like creating a chain of family. And sometimes that starts with a US citizen child being born in the US. I don't agree with that terminology, but I think that I've heard that talked about by the incoming administration. So potentially could be an area that they look to restrict. I I guess we'll see how that plays out, but just to keep that on your radar, especially if that's something that you were looking to potentially do. Okay, so we're almost done with this slide. Sorry, I skipped ahead unintentionally. Okay, students and OPT. Students are, we love foreign students. Foreign students are some of the brightest individuals you'll ever meet that come and study in our educational system. And then a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times stay and work for US companies. We have had something called a STEM OPT extension, which is OPT is the work permit that a student can get at the end of their degree study, or then they can work for 12 months under regular OPT, which is basically any higher degree. So you get a bachelor's in any field. It doesn't have to be a STEM field. You get the 1 year of OPT work permit to work in the field that you studied in as a student, right? So that's what OPT is. But then they started giving a 24-month on top of the 12-month extension of OPT, so an additional 2 years. This was like a huge benefit for students that studied a STEM degree, so science, technology, engineering, and math. So we have heard some talk about ending STEM OPT extensions. I'm not sure why you would want to target people that are in science, technology, engineering, and math fields. I mean, those seem like really important fields, which is why they gave the 24-month STEM OPT extension in the first place. But we do expect to see some kind of curtailing of this in the first term of the Trump administration. There was a regulation that they started working on to do some curtailing of OPT. Limitations to regular OPT, limitations or even possible termination of STEM OPT. That never happened in the first administration, but we could potentially see that get resurrected in the second Trump administration. And so we really encourage any international students that are here with a student visa to really stay abreast of this stuff, because that might impact their course of what they're going to do when their studies end. So please, if you're a foreign student listening to this, stay in touch with us on this topic, because it could be really change the course of what you're going to do during your studies and mostly after as well, immediately after. And the way that the foreign students can transition into the US workforce might be altered with these new restrictions that we expect to see potentially. The other thing with students is accruing unlawful presence when they fail to maintain their status. That could be something that is added into some student visa guidelines that right now is not exactly like that, right? So like when a student right now maybe is not maintaining exactly correctly under their student visa, they don't actually start accruing unlawful presence until it's adjudicated that they've started to accrue unlawful presence. So we could potentially see that change. And then that can affect the way the student is able to do anything after that point. Okay, so let's move on. I just want to make sure I didn't skip anything. Okay. We think that potentially there could be some kind of refusal to designate the eligible H-2B countries. So right now H-2Bs, which are temporary, like non-professional workers, like a lot of seasonal workers, use this visa. This is only available from certain countries, and they need to designate those countries, and they do that on a yearly basis. So we have heard a little bit of talk about that being a way to stop the flow of those visas, is to just refuse to designate the countries. I haven't heard too much about that, but I just wanted to put it out there as something that is floating around in the circles of people who are talking about this stuff and kind of dissecting what could happen as something that potentially could happen. So if your company relies a lot on those types of workers, then you might have an issue there that we need to discuss. I already mentioned a little bit about the STEM OPT, but during the last administration, they really started making some additional rules and policies about giving some preferential treatment to O1 visas, which this is visas, non-immigrant visas for extraordinary ability, when there was a STEM professional applying, and where the work was a STEM field. And the same with the NIWs, which are the National Interest Waiver employment-based second category green cards. They also gave that same kind of preferential treatment for STEM in the NIW. So we have heard rumors that there could possibly be revocation of those rules. So removing the STEM preference. Something that I don't even want to say it out loud because I really don't want it to happen, but there were some provisions during the first Trump administration to require applicants to prove that they would not become a public charge. It increased the documentation required significantly when applying for both an immigrant visa and a non-immigrant visa. Those we expect to be revived. So that's something that I hope saying it out loud didn't put that into the universe, because we really don't want that to happen. It was very onerous requirements for applicants, and just really complicated, increasing the number of pages on an application, by a lot, like many more pages, like much more complicated scenario for trying to prove that the applicant wouldn't become a public charge on the US. So we hope that that's not going to come back, but potentially that could come back. H4 and L2s, these are spouses of L1 and H1 and also H2 applicants. They had biometric requirements, then that was removed. So we think that that will likely be reinstituted. That's not that big of a deal, but it does require extra, time and effort for the applicants to have to go and do biometrics for the spouses of those types of applicants. What else? We had a nice run of not having interviews for green card cases. It's been fun while it lasted. I don't suspect it's going to last much longer. We saw the advent of employment-based green card interviews during the first Trump administration. That increased backlogs and significantly, right? Because now, instead of just once the case is adjudicated, approving and printing the green card and sending it to the applicant would have to go for an interview, almost like they were doing a marriage-based green card, which is where typically you see that requirement. So that was something that came about during the first administration. That went away, and it didn't exist. Then it came about during the first Trump administration, then it went away again during the Biden administration, and we expect that is likely to come back. So that is just going to add an extra requirement of the applicants to go for an in-person interview. And additionally, probably going to increase the time that then it takes to actually get the green card in the hands of the applicant substantially. Additionally, there were always marriage-based interviews, and then over the course of the last couple of years of the Biden administration, we saw the advent of marriage-based interviews being waived, and an opportunity to just like upload additional evidence about your the bona fides of your marriage is what we call them. So basically like evidence that it's a real marriage between a US citizen and a foreign national. And we were kind of, I mean, honestly, it streamlined the process a lot. Like, not that those interviews were bad. I mean, we were also used to them. It was just the way of doing things. So when they went away, it was kind of like, wow, this is amazing, right? It makes everything so much faster and easier. We suspect that those are gonna come back. So you will once again have to go for your in-person interviews for both family and employment-based adjustment of status cases, and that would be an interview before a USCIS officer. Remember, the consulates always have well, in most circumstances, an interview, but we're talking here about inside of the US applicants that are doing an adjustment of status. I've heard a little bit about limiting T and U eligibility to those that are participating in an active or ongoing investigation. I'm not going to talk too much about that because my firm doesn't handle those types of visas, so I don't want to pretend to tell you things that I don't know that much about. But if you think that one of those visas is something that you either have right now, or you could potentially, you know, that's something that you want to know more about, let me know, because I will connect you with trusted colleagues of mine that are specialists on those types of visas that can give you all of the information about that. I did want to mention it though, just in case. Sorry, I'm having a hard time with this. My mouse is so sensitive that I'm just like breathing on it and it's advancing the slide. So sorry if I'm giving you guys whiplash on the slides here. That was not my intention. Something else that we suspect is going to happen, and this was like a hot topic for me. I know during the first Trump administration, I did, you know, lots of seminars. Maybe some of you attended one of them about I-9 audits and E-Verify. They really increased the audits of companies on their I-9 forms. So for those of you that are business owners listening, I hope you know what an I-9 is. That's, remember, the form that the employer has to get the new employee to fill out within the first 3 days of work to basically verify their identity and their authorization to work in the United States. Audits of these forms carry significant fines and penalties. We saw the audits spike substantially during the first Trump administration. And then basically once COVID happened, they started to fall off because it just wasn't feasible for officers to be going into businesses when we were facing a pandemic and most people were, you know, working remotely, or businesses were closed down, or, you know, not exposing, even for sake of exposing the officers. I mean, you know, I think that could have even played into why they curtailed it, but it went down. And then during the Biden administration, there was still I-9 audits. It's not something that went away completely, but it substantially decreased. So we suspect to see that starting to increase again substantially, right? And that's going to be interesting now in a post-COVID world where there's a lot of work from home and there's a lot of potential now to audit what people were doing during the pandemic, which, so I do a lot of lecturing on this topic. So if you think that you might have an issue with I-9 or E-Verify, please reach out to me so that we can do a deep dive for you, because this could potentially be a problem for you if you were doing the COVID flexibilities for I-9 onboarding of your new people. or for re-verifying current employees that needed to have their work authorization re-verified, and you were doing it improperly, probably nothing happened. But now if the I-9 audits start to go back up, you're going to be facing pain, because that is going to be part of what you have to report in your audit, right? And so I can potentially see a real cluster, you know what, happening on this I-9 audit situation. Just in general, it was bad already. It was put companies, especially that aren't doing it properly, aren't doing their I-9 compliance properly, in a really bad situation. But now you're going to kind of add in that potentially there was some misuse of the COVID flexibilities and incorrect application of those relaxations of the rules because of the pandemic. You had to actually qualify to use those flexibilities. And I know for a fact, because I speak at HR conferences where I speak to a lot of employers that have I-9 and E-Verify concerns, that a lot of employers were not doing it correctly, were not following the flexibilities correctly, or didn't qualify to use the flexibilities but used them anyway. So this could potentially now become an issue, especially if the auditing starts to go back up again. I suspect it will. That was something that was really a high priority for the first Trump administration, so I would not be surprised at all if that comes back as one of their main priorities, which is I-9 compliance, making sure that everyone that is working for you at your company is who they say they are, and that they're authorized to work in the United States. Mandatory E-Verify, that could happen. It passed in the state of Florida for employers of a certain size over the course of the past year and a half. So, you know, that could become a nationwide thing. They've been talking about E-Verify becoming mandatory for years. It just never happens because there was, you know, not a consensus on that being a good idea. But potentially under an administration like this one that has the types of priorities and kind of more narrow and stricter views on immigration, I think that's something we could potentially see for sure. And we've seen it in a bunch of states, so I don't think it's that much of a leap for us to have nationwide mandatory E-Verify. Just for those of you that don't know, and the next slide is the last one that has kind of topics on it. So we're almost done, and we're going to open it up to questions shortly. But just for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about when I say E-Verify, E-Verify is like an electronic system that's run by the government, where when you onboard someone, you're basically running them through a real-time I-9 audit, basically, with the government, so that you get kind of back an answer right away from a database that's run both with the Social Security Administration and the Department of Homeland Security together, where they're basically cross-checking the information of the potential employee and spitting back to you whether this person is authorized to work in the United States or not. It doesn't replace I-9. It's like an additional requirement. I-9 is required of every single employer with any employees on payroll. So employers listening, if you are confused about I-9 or E-Verify and you have any employees on your payroll, please reach out to me, because we definitely need to have a chat about how you can make sure that you're in compliance now, before the audits start shooting back up again under the new administration. Okay, last but not least, we think potentially tourist visas, which are B visas, B1 and B2, which is basically, it's not a tourist visa, it's a visitor visa. B1 is a visitor for business, B2 is a visitor for tourism. They're already kind of hard to get. I mean, it's you have to really be able to prove that you have ties to your home country. So I alluded to it earlier 2 slides ago, but we do think that there's going to be kind of a stricter standard put in place on how someone is proving that they have intent to return to their home country after a short visit to the US. It's already pretty strict in my opinion. So I think that it could severely limit the amount of visas that are issued. You know, and most countries that aren't part of the visa waiver program, which is basically where you can just travel with your passport to the United States and not have to get an additional visa as long as you're just coming for a visit up to 90 days in length. Countries that don't qualify for that must, the nationals of that country must apply for a visitor visa before they can come to the US. It's already pretty hard, and one of the reasons is not just the proving home ties to your country, which is by far the largest reason that these visas get denied, but also the wait times in some countries are just insane, right? Like if you try to get a tourist visitor visa in Colombia, the wait time is like 2 years or something for the appointment, just to get the appointment to go for your visa interview. So we suspect to see that to just get worse, right? Like it's already kind of bad, but we think that that could potentially just be amplified, taking it from where it is now, which is pretty bad, to just like really bad. So not happy to report that, because we definitely want visitors to come to the US. Pretty like tourism dollars, you know, and those visas have a multitude of other purposes, such as coming to the US for medical treatment, you know, or even just to come to the US because you are on a US board of directors and you need to come to the board meeting. I mean, there's a lot of ways that those visas are used beyond just like your typical visit for a trip to Disney World, or your typical visit for a business visit, like going to a trade show or a business conference. Like these visas actually have a lot of varied use, so that could potentially be an issue for a lot of people. Moving on, for interest of time, I already talked a lot about the stuff on this slide, like backlogs. We do think that there's going to be an increase in processing times, more requests for evidence issued. These are kind of like general across the board. Doesn't matter really what category we're talking about per se, but we do think that there's going to be an increase in backlog, both because of potential curtailing of visa numbers, or like temporary freezes in visa issuances, or different kinds of travel bans that could be reinstituted, but also because of the staffing issue, turnover of staff, and then bringing in staff that is potentially less trained than the outgoing staff. Those are all things that could cause longer processing times. Requests for evidence are pretty bad already, so we can maybe expect to see those get more widely used, and potentially using a lot stricter interpretations of the law. Citizenship and naturalization, something I wanted to talk about. I've had a couple questions already about this. If you are a naturalized US citizen, I don't want you to get afraid. I've already had a couple people that we've helped naturalize at my firm reach out to us, actually scared that their citizenship was going to be taken away. I hope if you take nothing else away from this seminar, you take away, please don't worry about that much. You know, I want you to be proud that you've become a US citizen, and feel confident in your new citizenship, and the fact that you belong in this country, and that we want you here. So, you know, please take that comment to heart. But I will say that there has been some talk about, during the first Trump administration, they actually had this thing where they had like an office of denaturalization or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but where they actually started looking at people's naturalized citizens and how they got their citizenship, and basically trying to look at, did they get their citizenship in a fraudulent way, and then basically like taking steps to denaturalize those people. I saw like a couple news stories. I don't think that ever became like a big thing, right? I read a couple sporadic stories. I heard a couple of anecdotes, but that didn't seem to be like, there wasn't like a massive wave of people getting denaturalized, like naturalized citizens getting denaturalized. I will say, however, if you're listening and you have any reason to fear that you would be vulnerable in that situation because you think that potentially the way that you got either your permanent residence, your green card, or your citizenship was, maybe there was some issue there that maybe potentially you didn't qualify for the benefit you were given, let's talk. But I don't want you to get too worried about that. But I did want to mention it because it is something that we've heard about. The other topics that are more likely, I think that one's less likely. More likely is that the naturalization test is probably going to get harder. They tried to make it harder, and then they got kind of sued, and that never happened, and it kind of just stayed the way it was, where there's 100 questions, and they basically ask you 10 during your citizenship interview, and you have to answer 6 correct, unless you qualify for some kind of exemption. But that's kind of like your standard way. They did try to make moves to make the test harder. So we suspect to see that come back, that the test is potentially going to be like more questions or different questions, or just more complicated in different aspects. So that's something that we can probably expect to happen. But I kind of think that was ripe to happen anyway, regardless of the administration change. So I'm not necessarily sure that that's going to be like the main thing that this administration is trying to do, but potentially that could be something that we see happening, is that the test gets a little bit harder. The other thing that you hear on the news a lot, that I guess I'll mention just because I'm sure some of you are wondering about it, is doing away with birthright citizenship. It is the 14th Amendment that grants automatic citizenship to anyone that's born on US soil. Project 2025, which, Trump during the campaign kind of disavowed, but now, we're hearing people say, oh, well, he disavowed it, but actually like a lot of the architects of that document are becoming part of the new administration. So we suspect to see some of that actually come to fruition. We don't know for sure, like they haven't come out and said, okay, well, Project 2025 is exactly what we're going to do in the new administration. And they have disavowed it. So I don't know like where the line's going to fall on that one. But in that document, or whatever you want to call it, I guess it's a document, there is a definitely more restrictive approach to birthright citizenship, in particular with children of undocumented immigrants. I do think there's going to be lots of legal challenges if they try to do that. The 14th Amendment has guaranteed citizenship to people born in the US for like over 100 years, over 150 years. So I definitely think that that's going to face an uphill battle. It's also, in the Constitution, so that's going to be a more complicated thing to just do away with. But we have heard that conversation, so I did want to mention it. Department of Labor. For those of you that aren't involved in immigration on a day-to-day basis, you might not actually realize it, but the Department of Labor is quite involved in certain aspects of immigration law, especially with certain work visas like H-1Bs, for example, and H-2Bs, and then also with some of the categories of employment-based green cards, there's a whole process that has to be done with the Department of Labor. It is notoriously slow and terrible and difficult now, especially on the permanent side, not so much on the H-1B side. I mean, they're pretty efficient with the certifications that you have to get on the temporary visa side. On the permanent side, those labor certifications are a beast. And they are very complicated and they're very slow. And there's a lot of questionable adjudications that happen already. But we suspect that the backlogs and the audits and the denials are just going to get worse. There's potentially going to be some reduction in funding there, which is just going to make things slower than they already are, if that's even humanly possible, and potentially increase the audits and rate of denials on those labor certifications, which is kind of like the first step in an employment-based green card, some category of it, of the employment-based green cards. So we do suspect that as well. Okay, so that is about it. I'm gonna see if we have any questions. Quickly though, I just want to give you like some basic recommendations. This won't take long because it's not that hard. If you are in a position that you can apply for a green card, I highly suggest that you do it, and you do it as soon as you can, right? Because right now, until January 20th, we're still under the Biden administration. Nothing is going to happen until January 20th. And then on January 20th, it's not like overnight things are just going to, all these things we discussed today are going to happen, right? A lot of these things are laws that require, you know, a whole process to change. And even new policies, you know, potentially they could drop on day one if it's things that they've been working on kind of behind the scenes in anticipation of winning the election and coming back into power on January 20th. But, you know, I don't think there are many things that could happen overnight, but there are certain things that could happen relatively quickly. So I do suggest that if there is a way for you to put yourself into a more secure positioning, be that if you're a temporary immigrant to, you know, try to apply for a green card, or if you have a green card to try and apply for naturalization, if you're eligible. You know, obviously, if you're not eligible, there's really nothing you can do except hope that when your eligibility time comes, that the rules are still what they are now, right? Or still doable for you. But if there's something that you can do now or in the short term, I suggest that you investigate maybe that a little bit further and try to maybe make that move sooner rather than later is what I would suggest to you. Also, if you're traveling abroad and you have any kind of status that isn't US citizenship, I would suggest that you try to return to the US before January 20th, just in case there's some kind of ban or restriction that pops up. You don't want to be abroad when that happens. This, I think, is even more the case for people on non-immigrant visas like H's, L's, O's, you know, those types of visas. If you want to just make sure that you're here by January 20th in the US and not traveling abroad at that time, just to be safe. I mean, that's a conservative approach, but a lot of immigration attorneys I've talked to have said that they are advising their clients in that way. And so, and I tend to agree that that's something that you should consider. And then, you know, just to put it out there, we predict that a lot of these things that we talked about on the previous 3 slides are going to face some kind of legal challenge, right? So this is, again, like I said, not something that necessarily is going to happen overnight. Some things could happen a lot faster than other things, but there are advocates such as myself and my team and a lot of other really qualified and great immigration attorneys around the country and not just immigration attorneys, but attorneys from, you know, the ACLU and other organizations that are ready to mount legal challenges to some of these new restrictionist policies and laws. So I would like you to stay well informed, especially if you're a stakeholder in some way, that this stuff really affects you, or someone you love, or your employees, or your company. You know, if you have some kind of skin in this game and you're listening to this, not just because you wanted to support me or you found it interesting, but you have like a real stake in this stuff, you need to stay well on top of what's going on, because we do suspect that there's going to be a lot happening on this front. This won't be the last webinar. I'd love to tell you guys that, you know, we talked about it all and see you in 4 years, but this is going to be an ongoing thing. So stay tuned for more webinars, stay tuned for posts on social media, email alerts. You know, we'll try to keep you guys as well informed as we possibly can as things are developing. You know, we're going to do our best to keep you guys on top of everything that's happening over the course of the next couple months and years. We're committed as a law firm, and I think I speak for my colleagues in the immigration industry as a whole, but definitely I speak for me and my team, myself and my team. We're committed to advocating for you and your rights and keeping you guys updated on anything that can impact you, your family, your business. So please stay in touch with us. And for any clients that are listening that you have a case in progress, or that you want to talk to us about potentially trying to do something before January 20th, please reach out to us. And for any of you that aren't clients of my firm yet, but would like to talk to us, we welcome those conversations. We would love to help you guys. These are all the things that we do here at NERO Immigration Law. So we can help you on a wide array of non-immigrant, immigrant, family-based, employment-based, immigration, citizenship cases, and all the other goodies that you see up on the screen. So let's see if we have any questions. I don't see any questions. If anyone has a question and you want to drop it in the Q&A right now, please feel free. I'm going to have one more slide with my contact information. Feel free to grab it so you can be in touch with me. You have a QR code here that's going to open up an electronic business card that you can save right in your phone with all my contact information. And then you also have there on the screen the actual business card. And that is actually what my business card looks like. If you've seen one of my paper business cards, that is what it looks like. So please grab my contact information. Don't forget to stay in touch with us. And I'm going to end that. Okay. Let's see. We had a bunch of stuff in the chat. Let me just scroll through before we end this, guys. Make sure there's no pressing questions in the chat.
No questions.
Well, I hope that means I answered all your questions.
You covered
this
everything.
was informative for everyone. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you being here on an afternoon, and thank you so much. And please stay in touch with me and my team, and know that we're here to support you as all of this stuff starts to kind of develop and come to pass. Hopefully less of it comes to pass than what we said. Again, I'm not trying to scare anyone. I just want you guys to be well informed. Information is power. And so the more informed you are, the more you can take steps to make sure that you and your family and your friends and your business are well protected. Thanks for participating today. Hope to see you guys at one of my upcoming webinars. Thanks so much. Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
Bye, guys.